Can you see my screen, first of all? Yep. Cool. So throughout the presentation, I'm going to speak slowly. I'm not going to speak in my normal North London accent because you won't understand me. So I'm going to speak in Queen's English, or try. But if you don't understand anything, just raise your hand or yell and I'll reframe it in a different way. I speak a little French as well, so I can try that. So I'm going to start. So I'm going to be speaking for roughly 15 to 20 minutes. I'm going to be speaking slowly, so it's probably going to be 20 minutes. I'm going to touch on 3 subjects. The first one is going to be about why boundaries are important. So I live in a liberal world, or I put myself in a liberal world where I feel borders are not too useful. So borders stop us communicating and solving problems. But I suppose we can call boundaries our internal borders that we need to set up to be healthy. And I'm going to talk about why boundaries, or the internal borders that we need, are important. And then secondly, I'm going to discuss about well-being in design and why that's important. And then finally touch upon what makes a home. So I'm going to ask that question first of all, to allow you to think about it during the presentation, and then afterwards you can give me your ideas. So what makes a home? And maybe I'll reframe that to ask what makes a house a home. And the reason I ask that is because I speak a little bit of French. I've never found the correct word for home in French. C'est maison? No, that's more house. C'est chez moi? No, I suppose that's more my place. So think about it, find your word, and at the end you can explain why you think that word is the best translation. So a bit about me. This QR code on the side, oops, sorry, didn't mean to do that. This QR code here, if you scan that in, if you hold your phone up to the screen and scan it in, that will send you a link to my various social media sites and websites, which kind of explain what I do. I work for a company called DP Architects, who are one of the 10 largest architectural practices in the world. And I am the well-being in design advocate for that organization, which means I promote designing healthy buildings, which are healthy for the environment and healthy for the users, us. So onto why boundaries are important. So I'm going to use an example which has no boundaries to show why boundaries are important. And the example I'm going to use is co-living spaces. So what is a co-living space? It's shared housing designed to support a purpose-driven life, a modern urban lifestyle that values openness, sharing, and collaboration. So that's the marketing description, which isn't altogether true. But it's all about togetherness. They value togetherness as the most important aspect of building communities, togetherness. So there's 2 kind of general frameworks for co-living. The first is the single house, or the house share, which you probably, as students, you probably kind of do now. You're very familiar with it, with this setup, sharing a house with your friends, your mates. And generally it's about having communal spaces where you cook together, eat together, and live together. You possibly don't shower together, but there are kind of communal showering and toilet facilities as well. And then there's the private spaces, which are your bedrooms. So this is the exemplar in Japan, and it's a wonderful space, and it works if you don't live with psychopaths or slobs, people who are very messy. The next major model is the multi-occupancy building model, so where multiple people live in one building. And there's various types again. There's the service department, there's the compact hotel, there's a retirement house for old people, and there's student accommodation for you guys. And then finally, there's the co-living space. I'm not going to talk about all of these. I'm going to touch upon a few. The first one being a compact hotel. So this is the Citizen M Hotel, which is probably the most famous example in Europe. And it's all about with all of these co-living spaces, it's all about taking real estate or space from the private accommodation. Here it's the guest room, and moving that into the public spaces. So you have more space in the public spaces. So here we have one of the guest room examples, and they're really tight, small spaces. So you can see from the plan that the bed actually spans the full width, and the cleaning toilet facilities are kind of like a cubicle or a pod. So they use a lot of technology and devices and fun kind of spatial organizations to create a quirky, cool space. So they kind of move the idea of this being possibly a tight, unusable space to something which is technologically quirky and fun. And they move that space into the public areas. So by doing this, you get more area to collaborate and network in the public spaces. And you're able to offer a price point, a cost, which is more like 3-star plus, but offer in the public spaces a service which is more 4-star plus. So you can do more and have more fun, in theory. So then the final type of co-living idea I want to talk about is the co-living space, which I'm going to focus on. So this is a co-living space in Bali. You can see this is sunshine and warmth. You probably have forgotten what that is, being snowed in. But this example is interesting because the private accommodation, you can see here, the plans are essentially a guest room. So they're basically modeled around how hotel guest rooms work. So you have the bathroom, toilet facility, storage, a sleeping bedroom, a bed, and a little space for potentially studying and potentially eating. And then you have a terrace, because it's a warm climate. It's great to have private external space. So a little balcony, and the alternative is a similar model here. And then all that space is pushed to the public areas where you can gather, eat together, talk together, work together, and play together. So the final model I wanted to show you is the collective. So this is, I suppose the collective is the most famous European co-living space. This particular example is in London. And again, you have amazing public spaces, spaces to study, hang out, eat together. And the private spaces are a bit more restrained and a bit smaller because you spend less time in. Actually, this is another model. This is We Live in the US. So WeWork is probably the most famous co-working space, which was really big in the noughties and the 2010s. And in the 2010s, they moved into the residential model, which is We Live. And again, they're great design spaces, a bit tighter on and a bit more generous in the public areas. So it's not just space, it's also the service offer. So they offer a lot of additional management incentives, things like lessons, gym membership, additional storage, just to make it more fun and cohesive. So there's positives to co-living spaces, but essentially it's all about togetherness, and they feel togetherness is the essential ingredient to build communities. And it's all about networking, the synergy of different ideas coming together to create new valuable ideas, meeting people seamlessly, whether it's work, play, or rest. So there's no boundaries, seamless communication. And this kind of space is great for people like you and people who just finished studying, and also people who've recently divorced. So it's for single people, and you probably can guess why. I'm going to show you a brief video now of the collective, and this is a marketing video, so yeah, a pinch of salt.
Ensuite room, so this starts at £850, and you've got the kitchenette here. It's fully furnished, so it comes with everything. And then as we walk into the ensuite room itself, you've got a nice spacious room with big window that lets lots of light in. You've got underbed storage, So for your belongings, and then we've partnered with Love Space, who are a storage company as well, so you can store your winter clothes, your bike close by. Co-living is offering people not only a place to live, but also a place to thrive, a place to come and meet new people, a place to meet potential mentors, business partners, to learn new skills. And I think
in the evening, you can go downstairs, like here in the lobby, or there where there is the bar, and there are lots of people like me who are alone, like, so you can miss all this.
So we have two projects that we're currently building at the moment, one in Stratford and one in Canary Wharf, that will both open in early 2019. And then we're currently looking internationally as well, because we don't feel like this is a problem that's unique to London that we're trying to solve. This is an international problem.
So sounds great, doesn't it? Well, the collective folded. They stopped business this year in 2021 because the model doesn't work. And COVID kind of accentuated some of the problems with the model. And the main problem with the model is that communities don't just need togetherness, they need boundaries. They need a sense of separation. This is my personal view. Obviously, you guys have to think about it and come to your own conclusions. But the problem with the collective and other co-living spaces is there's just a lack. There's a lack of space, there's a lack of privacy, because it's always on, there's always noise, activity, there's a lack of quiet, and there's a lack of separation between work, rest, and play. Because you're in these environments where you're meeting people you don't really know. When you meet someone you don't know, you put up a facade and you present to them what you think they want to see. So you're never honest. And because there's never an honesty, there's never that breaking that glass wall of honesty, there's a lack of identity. So this results in huge problems. Because of that lack of honesty, there's a loss of identity and a lack of self-worth. In these spaces, because you're kind of sharing these spaces with others, to get anything done, you have to have consensus. So you have to be able to be super emotionally intelligent and convince your peers to do what you want. For example, if you want to watch a TV program, you need to get a majority to agree to it. So that means there's a lot of tribal posturing and a lot of gang mentality, which leads to bullying and other negative aspects. It's also not hugely productive because everyone's on networking. There's never any time to do the work. And because everyone's always on, there's burnout. So these are the negatives. There's obviously positives, but I'm kind of highlighting the negatives. So I'm going to move on now to one of the links to your study material, which I hope you've looked at. This was Ty Celeste's TED presentation on, I suppose it was essentially on identity. She talked about borders, nationality, and what it is to be local, but essentially she was talking about identity. So if I met Ty, I would want to ask her for her, what does she need to make a home? So maybe this is your second question. You could think about, after what she explained is important to her, what do you think she would need in the home to make it livable for her? So the next topic I want to discuss very briefly, because it's kind of a slight digression, is why well-being in design is important, because it's kind of what I do. I think you all know why being healthy and having a sense of well-being is important, so I'm not going to labor this, but it's the idea that if you are fully well and fully healthy, you can realize your full potential. You can cope with the normal stresses in life. So this is probably the most important one. If you're psychologically healthy and stable, you can deal with normal stresses. Obviously, if someone's chasing you with a machine gun, well-being won't help, but for normal stresses, it works. And then also you can be fully productive and fruitful. And then finally, you can contribute to your society and your community, giving you a purpose, which again is hugely important. So you probably know all of that. What you might not know is why designing for well-being, what we do, is hugely important. So this diagram here shows you the different social determinants of health. So what makes us and keeps us healthy? So one of them is parents. So our genealogy contributes to our health. Then there's medical interventions. So if you live near a hospital, which is good, you're more likely to be treated when you're ill and survive. Then there's lifestyle. So if you eat healthily and exercise regularly, which we should all do, but don't really. If we do that, we stay healthy. And then finally, the environments we live in and the people we surround ourselves with contribute to our health. And as you can see, it's the biggest contributor. So that's why, as architects and as designers of the built environment, what we do is hugely important. And we have to work with other experts like psychologists, sociologists, neuroscientists, who have a deeper knowledge of what we need to do to stay healthy. And we need to use that knowledge to design different spaces. That's where all of you guys come in. So at DP Architects, we've kind of resolved what we think are the design changes we need to make healthier spaces. I'm not going to go into this now because it's very long, but I'm happy to share this with you and talk about it on another occasion. But I wanted to touch upon one of the pillars. There's 4 pillars, and the one which I think is important for today is community. So community is about designing inclusive spaces which are welcoming to all types, regardless of age, sex, ability, sexual orientation, race. And this is about kind of spreading your network as wide as you can get it to include more people. And it's also about creating spaces which are psychologically inclusive as well. So when you come into these spaces, you feel that you're part of the community and you're welcome. And if you feel part of the community, you're more likely to take care of it, which will make it sustainable because there's someone who is protecting the community and fixing it when it goes wrong. And then finally, if you can feel secure and safe in that community, you're more likely to not use your energy on defending yourself and use that energy to do useful, productive things to move yourself and the community forward. So now to my kind of question which I raised at the start and my conclusion. What makes a home? So these are my conclusions, not yours. You need to come up with your own conclusions, I hope. So what I felt when I watched Tai Celeste's lecture was that she focused on 3 points, which are rituals, relationships, and restrictions. So I kind of read rituals as the things she does on a day-to-day basis, which becomes habit and eventually becomes history. So rituals and what we do is kind of how we describe history in the past. The second thing she discussed were the relationships. So the people she interacts with most on a day-to-day basis and the people who influence her. So this is the humans in her life, and I would call this the community. So there's rituals, which is history, and relationships, which is community or humans. And then finally, she talks about the restrictions. So the borders and the boundaries, which define what she can do. So I think with community and history, we get culture. And then with culture, we get identity. So that was my take on it. And I think all 3 things are important to create a sustainable, healthy culture and community. So then my final question, what makes a house a home? So first of all, we need to define what a house is. So for me, a house is a functional apparatus to live, providing the basics: warmth, shelter, and sustenance. So what we eat. It provides the boundaries. So it provides the boundaries so we can live in a home. So what's a home? A home is a place we care for and where we feel protected, a place we belong. You could argue it's the smallest type of community or the smallest type of nation. We feel that we can be honest with our family within a circle of trust, and this allows us to explore who we really are in privacy without the risk of being judged or condemned. But through that honesty, we can really engage with our true identity. So it's a home because it defines our community and culture and our own identity. So the two aspects I feel make a healthy, sustainable community are togetherness and solitude. You need both, so togetherness and boundaries. So I thought it'd be a cool exercise to actually figure out in a home what you could design in the home or place in the home to help support these two ideas. So with togetherness, I thought a kitchen table would be a cool object to use to define this ideal, because in a family setting, the kitchen table is where that family commune, where they eat together, talk together, play together, and also resolve disputes. So the actual model I looked at was the Maggie Centre. So I'm not sure you're all familiar with the Maggie Centre, but the Maggie Centre is a building type in the UK where people with cancer can go and talk about their problems. It's a palliative care centre. So these guys are dying, they can't be cured, and it's about how they address the next stage in their life. So it's hyper attuned to well-being and psychological well-being. So this is one of the examples of the kitchen table in the Maggie's West London by Richard Rogers. And you can see here, the table is in the center of, we could call it the home, the Maggie Centre. And it's all about the processional, the processional route to the table. So the next, I'm just gonna grab a sip of water. The next example is the Maggie Centres in St. Bart's by Stephen Hall. And this is the kitchen table. And I just want to briefly describe the plan because it kind of explains both the idea of togetherness and boundaries or solitude. So this is the kitchen table here at the center of the space. This is more a tower building typology rather than a flat typology as per the previous example. So there's things happening above this. So the kitchen table, which is all about togetherness, is in the center of the space. When I'm going to call these guests, not patients. So when the guests come in, usually for the first time, they're quite apprehensive. They don't really want to come into this space directly to the center of this table and talk to strangers about the fact that they're dying. So they need a sense of privacy. So they tend to come in at the entrance and they tend to loiter in the little kind of hidden private areas. And for example, they'll come in, they'll pick up a book, they'll pretend to read the book. And then one of the guardians or wardens who are kind of hanging out here will spot them, will come from the public area to the more secluded areas and have a chat. And they'll talk about how the guest feels. And then either they'll sit down in the more private areas, talk, or they'll come into the more common space. And maybe at the kitchen counter, they'll put a kettle on the counter to boil some water for some tea. And during that boiling, they'll have a conversation about something, the weather, for example, just to get the guest in a comfortable state. And when the water's boiled, the tea is ready, they'll come to the communal table and they'll start talking. And eventually the guest will start talking to other guests who have similar problems, and they'll share those problems, because togetherness is super important. So in communities, we need togetherness to share our ideas. And especially in times of trauma, we need to be together. We're social animals. But we also need boundaries. We also need to be alone and in solitude. So that's where this second aspect comes in. I think the example I use here is the private bedroom, because I feel that's the most formal way of discussing solitude. And I was going to touch upon guest rooms in hotels, because there's clear design parameters we use to make them isolated. So when we sleep, it's proven now that we need darkness, silence, and no olfactory, no bad smells. So these aspects allow us to sleep comfortably and identify with solitude. So this is a guest room I've just completed in Bonnevaux in France, near Poitiers. It's a meditation retreat. So it's a very active, interesting room. It has loads of features like a pull-out desk and open shutters, but at nighttime, it completely closes down. The shutters close, the table gets pushed away, and it becomes a very, visually quiet space. So there's no lights. The walls and floors and ceilings are acoustically sealed, so there's no sounds. It's a silent retreat, so silence is super important. So any pin drop in a silent retreat can be heard. So silence acoustically is super important. And also in terms of architecturally, all of the furniture is designed to be soft. So you have curved organic forms. This is because sharp edges are seen to be psychologically stressful. So if we can design soft spaces, we can create an internal silence, an internal calm as well, which is great for the psyche. So even the handles are soft and organic. So that's where I'm going to end it, and I'm going to end again with that question: what makes a home? Thank you. I can't really hear you guys, so if
yeah, I think they are quite shy as well. I mean, I don't know if you've done it before, like having some sort of interaction. Est-ce que vous avez déjà fait ce genre d'interaction avec quelqu'un en ligne et vous dans la classe? Oui, ça vous est déjà. It's the first time, yeah, so that's why. It's an experiment. Yes.
I can speak in French if that helps. Je peux parler en français si ça va être plus facile.
To translate my question in English.
Okay.
To be clear, because I'm not clear in general. So we are with students from architecture and with students in forensic psychology.
You have to speak into the computer, I think, because into the microphone, because
we are, sorry.
That's perfect, perfect.
We are with students in architecture and with students in forensic psychology. And I have a question about what about your presentation, and make links maybe with some space that are not qui ne sont pas liés, enfin qui sont that are not.
You can speak it. You can say it in French as well, because I might be able to understand.
If donc, votre présentation, elle met en avant un peu des piliers et des recommandations pour créer des espaces qui nous font sentir chez nous, home. Et ma réflexion, elle est un peu là-dessus, c'est que pour les populations forensiques, délinquantes, offenders and others, est-ce que finalement, ces personnes-là, elles sont souvent amenées à passer énormément de temps dans in prison, forensic placement, some psychiatric hospitals and others. Et est-ce que finalement ces principes-là, pour des lieux et pour des personnes entre guillemets qui, dans la croyance populaire, ne le méritent pas, voilà, quel sens ont ces principes de bien-être, puisque la prison, l'hôpital devient un peu la maison, voilà, pendant une longue période. Comment on adapte un petit peu ces principes de bien-être à ce type de lieu? Et désolé.
That's a good question. So you're saying, how can you adapt the ideas of well-being to places like prisons and maybe old people's retreats where they can find this space for long periods of time or forever? So that's a really good question. I wanted to share with you a project I'm working on in Bonnevo, but I just had no time. My presentation was originally 30 minutes long, but I had to cut it down. It's a meditation retreat in France where the community live all the time in that place in a like monks, but they're not monks, but they live in generally for most of the time in silence. They meditate regularly, and because they're in silence, you have to design the space in a certain way. And people think monks are chilled, really cool guys. They are, but they have the same issues as any community who live together all the time, and who are following a set of rules. So they follow the order of Saint Benedict. In prison, you follow the prison rules, and it's a really interesting exercise to try and design those kind of spaces, because they had, by being together all the time, you have to design the spaces not to encourage too much contact. Bizarrely, because you're together, you're confined together so for all the time. You need your solitude, and without that solitude and silence, it just collapses the whole relationship between these. I'm calling them monks. They're not monks. So I think one of the important aspects is silence and solitude, because the togetherness will happen. We're social beings, and we will find a way together. So the funny thing with these silent retreats is people aren't silent. Yeah, the rule is you should be silent all the time. If you go for a week, you should be silent. But people whisper to each other. They find ways to communicate. Like you're not even meant to look at each other in the eye, because that creates a connection, and you're meant to always look down and be insular. But people still communicate with their eyes, and they will find a way. So I think the important thing is to make sure you have the solitude bit locked in. And that comes from creating very simply creating bedrooms and sleeping accommodation, which removes all stimuli. So light, sound, all of those things are removed. And then by doing that, so one of the other pillars is hapticity. So this is the idea that you need to use all your senses to design space. As architects, we just use light and form and our eyes, but we need to engage with our touch, our smell, our taste. And if you create places of solitude, when you eat food, it becomes a lot richer. When you smell odors, they become a lot more deep and moving. So I think the important thing is the borders or boundaries aspect of spaces.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Kailas, for this qualitative and relevant presentation. Yeah, I really enjoy, and I think students as well. I have just one question about maybe the buffer or the spaces or transition spaces in community houses or in co-housing sharing spaces. And sometimes with some community, it's really, it became difficult when it's concerned religion or some aspects of their cultures. And sometimes it's really the starting of, it's like a start point of a lot of problem. It can be about religion practice inside some community spaces, or sometimes in the kitchen with maybe sometimes just with the smelling of some kitchen cultures and so on, can be a start point of some discussion or some stress. So how you can maybe define this buffer zones or transition zones, and how we can really define limits between people inside the co-housing. Thank you.
That's a really difficult, deep question. So I had the privilege of seeing the Dalai Lama, the Dalai Lama, you know, the Dalai Lama yesterday, and he was having a dialogue with the community at Bonnevo. So the community at Bonnevo are a Christian community. The Dalai Lama is Buddhist, but the conversation was very secular because you touched upon religion, and he was amazing because he for the most well-known religious leader in the world, he basically said religion is personal, and education, and he calls it warm-heartedness. So le cœur chaud, a warm-heartedness is universal. So education, warm-heartedness is universal. Religion is private. So I think we need to take those ideas into how we design spaces, and everyone should be able to practice their religion, but I think there should also be an understanding that it's your personal belief systems, and when we live in a wider community, we have to respect not the secular nature, but we have to respect the lack of religion in that wider community. In terms of non-spaces, so that things like corridors and non-functional spaces, we worked with some neuroscientists recently about these spaces. In my architectural training a long time ago, we always discussed the idea that the functional space should be the most important space. So people like Frank Lloyd Wright always designed very small non-spaces so that when you get into the functional space, you're more impressed by the space. Interestingly, the neuroscientists were saying that the corridor spaces are equally as important as the functional spaces, as you're saying, and by having things in the non-spaces, having planting, having art, you can calm people down. And I think it's about using those non-spaces to modify behavior. So for example, in schools, when kids are in the playground, they're very active and kind of, they want to punch each other, but it's about getting them from the playgrounds to the classrooms and being able to study in the classrooms. So they use the non-spaces to calm the students down. So by the time they get to the classrooms, they're in a place to study. So the Dalai Lama actually talked about that as well, the idea that anger and jealousy are bad for study. You need to be calm. And I think for discussions and dialogue between religions, calm is super important. So if you're ever stressed in a meeting, just pause and meditate for two minutes or a minute, because it will reframe your perspective and make you able to discuss things in a more honest, open way. And designers can't solve all problems. I think in terms of conflicts, in terms of cooking smells, we can't remove that. If someone wants to cook a curry in a house, it's gonna get everywhere. We just either have to enjoy curry or not cook it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kailas. We wanted to thank you very much for today. It was a great presentation.